Welcome to an hour of Healthmade Radio. Healthmade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. Healthmade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Dr. Kevin Millet. Dr. Millet is the owner of Total Body Modification, TBM, after having been an instructor since 2003. TBM is a comprehensive system of alternative healing compiled by chiropractic and naturopathic Dr. Victor L. Frank and first taught in 1978. Dr. Millet was originally exposed to TBM in 1986 while a medical student working in the clinic of the founder of TBM, Dr. Frank. Upon graduation, Dr. Millet began to formally study under Dr. Frank. Dr. Frank personally mentored Dr. Millet, and at his death in 2009, Dr. Frank chose to entrust the legacy of TBM to him. Dr. Millet continues to be the principal instructor and ongoing developer of TBM. Dr. Millet, it's such an honor to have you on the show. What is
Thank you.
TBM? I mean, what is total body modification? What makes it unique?
Well, there are a few things. One, TBM is part of a long lineage of subtle influence medicine, where we don't seek to directly affect the body. We seek to affect the neurologic system, which then affects the body, and that separates us from biomedicine, which is where through drugs, surgery, lasers, and so forth, they directly try to affect the body. And so we take a more subtle approach. And Viktor Frank was exposed to the idea of the human body functioning as a computer. And up until that time, no one had ever applied the computer type of thinking. This was in the 1960s, to the human body. And he thought, well, if the human body functions like a computer, that means it has programs. And if it has programs, they can be modified. And in fact, maybe poor health is improper programming. And so total body modification, in his mind, became finding the faulty programs that are promoting ill health and erasing and reestablishing healthy programs that promote sound health. And he drew from his experiences in body work and nutrition, and you mentioned spirituality a little bit earlier, and brought a holistic approach to really bring that about, not just changing the programs, but then also making sure there's a lifestyle that supported that.
So that sounds like an amazing endeavor, to look, obviously, looking at the electrical system, which is the nervous system, to try to correct then the signaling to all these organ systems. I mean, that sounds incredible. How would you go about doing that? I mean, do you come up with that idea? I mean, how do you tap into that?
How do we tap into those programs?
Being able to kind of tap into this electrical system or the nervous system, and then being able to evaluate as to what's good, what's bad, what's wrong. I mean, how do you do that?
Sure. We look at the muscular system, and the skin of the body is essentially a projection of that computer. And so we're able to read into the body's biocomputer through contact on the skin and through muscle response testing. And through contacting different points on the body, or sometimes putting the body in particular positions, and then doing a muscle response test, we do it manually, what it actually does is simultaneously allows us to assess a particular function, whether that's water metabolism or whether that's heart rhythm or a certain aspect of liver function. It allows us to assess it and read the body, but at the same time, what it does, like tapping on a touch screen on your smartphone, opening up a particular program, when we access that function to evaluate it, we actually load it up on the screen. And we have a window of about 45 seconds where we can apply further input to the body, and we do that typically along the spine, in mind, stimulating the autonomic nervous system, which is what regulates all the vital functions of the body. And so we use the spinal column like a keyboard, if you will, during that 45-second window, and that's when we're able to actually change the programming and restore it back to its original pristine functioning, and then the dysfunction simply goes away. Our experience is that most dysfunction in the body has nothing to do with anything other than just the programming that's driving it. There's a difference between pathology, which is tissue destruction, and pathophysiology, which is where you have healthy tissue, but it's not working properly. And that's really where we shine, where what we work on is getting that healthy tissue that isn't working properly the right signals so it can do its job.
So you're mentioning that you kind of activate, you open up this application, or you open up this this program, and then you have about 45 seconds to create a change within this program. So and you're doing that then by touching on the skin, or touching different areas on the skin, and on the skin obviously you have all these nerve endings that relate to all the different organs and so forth. So is there how do you know that you're accessing what you are accessing? I mean, you're talking about some water level, and I'm sure blood sugar levels, and there are a lot of different components within the body. How do you know that you're accessing what you're accessing, and that you are creating an impact on that?
The way that I personally know is that when I was in practice, I retired about 2 years ago to devote myself full-time to developing total body modification. But when I was in practice, I was a diagnostic junkie, and I did everything from motion MRIs to heart rate variability to electrodermal testing to allergy testing, very in-depth blood work, X-rays, physical exams, and more. And I just had this insatiable desire to do that, and I was able to see in these tests rapid results that reflected what we were doing. And as I was thinking about that, Viktor Frankl, who basically developed this system, he had the confidence through trial and error over a long period of time. Well, at his death, yes, I'd had some experience, but nothing like what he had had. And all of these vast diagnostic evaluations that I was getting constant feedback allowed me quickly to realize this isn't just, we're not just shuffling, symptoms from the left to the right. We're actually truly changing physiology.
So you were able to, in order to be able to then correlate that this was the application that you pulled up by touching the body on certain areas on the skin to pull up whatever it may be, you were able then to correlate that with what you saw through other diagnostic tools like lab, food sensitivity testing, hair mineral analysis, heart rate variability, or whatever it may be. So is that what was taking place?
Absolutely. And it's interesting, though, as a fellow clinician, you understand patients might be a little bit interested in those types of things, but in the end, they're most interested in just feeling better. And really, it was the renewed quality of life that was the real test.
Yep.
I mean, my scientific mind loved all these other things, but my patients, they wanted energy. They wanted to be able to sleep. They wanted to be able to remember well. And I specialized in dysautonomic syndromes like fibromyalgia, lupus, MS, and chronic fatigue, and so forth. And most of my patients were disabled, and they weren't disabled after just a few months of applying this. And let me just also explain that, this is not the only thing we do with patients. Working with a biocomputer is critical, but you have to marry it with a lifestyle that supports sound function in the body. I mean, most of the reasons these programs were messed up in the first place was because the body had been neglected. And so we have to simultaneously stop neglecting the body while we're putting things back in order.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt. This is Healthmade Radio. I am here with Dr. Kevin Millet. He is the owner of Total Body Modification. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt. I'm here with Dr. Kevin Millet. He's the head instructor and also owner of an amazing technique that brings you back to health, brings you back to balance, called Total Body Modification. Dr. Millet, you were mentioning that in addition to, or you were saying that TBM, or Total Body Modification, where it really shines is not when you have a organ degeneration. It's more when the communication to that organ, or like an organ dysfunction or signaling dysfunction to that organ, is not what it should be. And that is where TBM really shines, is to kind of activate that signaling system and bring it all back online. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Sounds about right. Okay. So, but you were mentioning things like lupus, where you have, obviously, you can have kidneys and pancreas, and I mean, there can be a lot of things that where there can be degeneration of the tissue almost, and still with TBM, you were able to turn that around in just a couple of months.
Yeah, there's a couple of things maybe I could mention along with that. I read a book years ago by a gerontologist called "We Live Too Short and We Die Too Long." And one of the things that he pointed out in his book is that you don't get symptoms until you've lost an enormous amount of function in the body. And so what I realize with my patients is that, they maybe could have lost, let's just hypothetically say 50 or 60% of their liver function. Well, the body's perfectly capable of functioning on 40% of their liver if it's optimized. And so sometimes we don't have the luxury of getting a complete renewal of all the tissue. But the good news is we don't have to. If we can get a renewal of the tissue that's still been unaffected or that's undamaged, oftentimes that's more than enough for the body to kick in and work, and for us to feel better.
So even when it is a chronic condition that, you're talking about lupus, fibromyalgia, and I'm sure, something like MS would fall in this category as well. I mean, because you have some degeneration, but you still have functioning tissue that you can activate, and you just need to kind of restore the signaling to that tissue. Is that correct?
Yeah, restore the signaling, also, nourish it abundantly, and then engage in lifestyle activities that actually promote proper function in the body. Just simple things like exercise and reducing calories and making sleep a priority. Sleep hygiene is very important in our work. Sleep is where the body renews and where it heals. And, if there's light coming in the room, if there's, noise disruptions, if you've, been doing a lot of stimulating activities or eating stimulating food right before it's time to go to sleep, all these things degrade the quality of sleep. And that's where, the healing and the renewal happens. So I don't want to give the impression we push these buttons on the body and that's all there is to it. There's actually a lot of responsibility that we place on the patient. There's a lot of work they have to do in addition to the work we're doing.
So for a patient then coming in to a TBM practitioner, I mean, what does that look like, and what happens through that process?
Well, the first thing is we start with lifestyle. So we increase their water. Most people we find are drinking far below the amounts of water that we see is required for healing. And our rule of thumb is 2/3 of an ounce per pound of body weight as a minimum. So we take their weight and times it by 0.666 and say that's your minimum. We add a quart to that and say that's your maximum. Make sure you don't avoid salts and stay within that realm. We get them doing some modest exercise depending on their level of fitness coming in. A lot of times that's just brisk walking, and then we start looking at their diet and getting the things out of their diet that work against sound physiology. There's a lot of things that a lot of people are eating and they have no idea how it's affecting their body, and we can just simply replace it to something that tastes just as great but doesn't have these offending properties. And then we'll also use nutritional supplementation. Our experience is that it's really not possible with the amount of calories we eat to get all the nutrients we need. We have to supplement. And what I'm referring to is our ancestors, hunter-gatherers, burned between 6,000 and 8,000 calories a day. And so they had to eat 6,000 to 8,000 calories a day. You get a lot more nutrients if you're eating 7,000 calories than if you're eating 1,500 calories. And so, of course, we're not going to eat 8,000 calories a day. We would gain too much weight and such. And so we eat less because we're not as physically active as they were, and we compensate with a specific program of nutritional supplementation. So we prepare all of that first, because once we begin the healing process, and I'm sure you've learned this yourself, the body is going to detoxify. And if we haven't prepared the body first, if its ability to detoxify is not active, then we're just going to make the person sick, and they're going to be miserable, and their healing process is going to interrupt with their work. It's going to interrupt with their ability to attend school or what have you. And so we get that prep work first, but then when we start to activate the nervous system to start to renew these functions that have been dormant sometimes for decades, and those toxins start getting released, the body can just move them right out, and they can heal and still engage in their life activities.
So in essence, you don't put them on like a detox program, because I know a lot of patients come to me and they say, I just want to detox, and they've been doing all these detox programs and they obviously haven't gotten well. So from your point of view, it's more important than to lay that foundation, and when you have that foundation and restore normal physiological function, the body will then naturally start to detox, and will detox in a fashion that it can handle.
Spot on. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to offend anybody in your audience, but we have found going after detox directly ends up creating more problems than it solves. The detox has to be a byproduct of renewing the body. the body will detoxify itself, and if the body isn't being renewed and it's not functioning at that type of a level, and you force a detox, you're stirring up all of these toxins in the body that it may not be able to deal with. And all of a sudden they're being pulled out of fat tissue, put into circulation, doing their damage once again, and they'll eventually just be put back into fat tissue. And so, we take a very different approach with that. And it's like sleep. If you go straight after sleep, sleeping pills don't make people sleep. What sleeping pills do is make people not annoyed with the fact that they're not sleeping. You have to let sleep happen. Sleep is a byproduct of a sound functioning body. We see the same, that's how we view detoxification as well.
It's fascinating. We're just going to take a quick break. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt. I'm here with Dr. Kevin Millet, owner of Total Body Modification. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt. Today's guest, I'm here with Dr. Kevin Millet, owner of Total Body Modification, TBM. So in addition to then obviously correcting a dysfunctional nervous system signaling to activate the unhealthy organ function, you're also then promoting a healthy lifestyle, healthy eating, drinking plenty of water, 3/4 of an ounce per pound of body weight, which is a good amount of water. But
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So how you're talking about sound diet? I mean, there's so many diets out there. I mean, we're talking about, we have ketogenic, we have vegan, we have vegetarian, we have eat right for your blood type, we have Atkins, we got Predicans, we have, I mean, on and on and on and on. So what type of diet does Total Body Modification promote?
That's a great question. I oftentimes will begin our introductory course when I'm teaching healthcare providers, and I say to them, if I were to ask this room right now, and obviously we have a lot in common because we're all here studying this topic together, what a healthy diet is, how many opinions do you think we would get? And everyone agrees that you're going to get a different opinion for everybody that's there. And I said, so if we can't agree, how on earth do we expect the lay public, whose career is not devoted to studying all these healthcare issues and physiology and everything, how do we expect them to know? And then I proposed to them something that will bring us all together. And what I proposed to them is that we wind the clock back 200-300 years, back to a time where the demands that were placed on the body were enormous, but yet they were able to meet those demands, and they didn't have drugs, they had very little surgery, and maybe they knew something about diet. And maybe in the 20th century, when we industrialized farming, we industrialized food production, maybe we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And maybe we might be better off if we go back and we look at our ancestors and we eat more in accordance the way they did, as close as we can approximate. Obviously, we do live in a different time. And we make that our foundation, and we start to improve upon that. I personally think the 20th century was nonstop folly when it came to nutrition. There's almost nothing that came forward nutritionally in the 20th century that I think was an advancement. And we've seen in the 21st century just theory and commandments and warning, one after another, that came out of the 20th century being dropped, whether it's prohibition against salt, prohibition against cholesterol, prohibition against saturated fat. I mean, all of these things are just going by the wayside. And, we could wait for that, but I think you could probably agree that 300 years ago, we did a whole lot better that we're doing today with nutrition. And it's not so far back that we can't come pretty close to approximating that.
So then you have, I mean, you mentioned salt, and obviously everyone with high blood pressure, and that's met with a cardiologist, are going to start jumping up and down.
Not if they read their mail. No, that's been debunked. I couldn't understand someone who is reading contemporary research that is going to stand behind the salt theory.
So tell me about that for all the people that are still believing in the theory that if I have had high blood pressure, I need to stay away from salt. What would you tell them?
I practiced in Barcelona. Intense phobia of consuming salt. If you're not drinking water, yeah, you've got to avoid salt. If you're drinking Coca-Cola and coffee, which is what most people in Barcelona, that was their fluids, and some wine. As if you're doing that, okay, I'll agree with you, stay away from salt. But you've got to drink this amount of water that we're requiring in TBM to support detoxification. You must have salt, or otherwise you're going to develop hyponatremia, which is, water intoxication, basically. And I did not have a single one of my patients who were hypertensive, and I had scores of patients who were on medication for hypertension. Once we started working with them, they chose to stop taking their medication. I gave them that option. If they wanted to stop, it was up to them, but they had to promise me they would measure their blood pressure on a daily basis for about 6 months. I never had a single one of those patients ever go back on their antihypertensives, not one time. From my experience, hypertension is purely and simply hypohydration.
Yeah.
There's not enough water in the body, and so the heart is having to pump sludge, basically, thickened blood, because there's not enough water to go around for all the different functions in the body. So the heart has to increase the pressure to try to mobilize a thickened blood. And I didn't come up with this theory. You might be familiar with the book "Your Body's Many Cries for Water" by Batman Gellick,
Yeah, absolutely.
the physician for the royal family before the revolution in Iran, and I found it to be spot on that's the issue, is hypohydration.
Yeah, and it's in addition to that, in addition to the heart having to pump sludge, and increase pressure that way, because there's not enough fluid in circulation, then the blood vessels in themselves need to constrict in order to create more pressure, because you're trying to move less fluid to a higher elevation, trying to get it up to the brain, and the only way to do that is obviously with more pressure. So so the solution in your eyes, for all the listeners out there, high blood pressure, drink more water, and then when you've drunk enough water, drink a little bit more, and obviously make sure that you get enough salt at the same time, and that, along with the other techniques that you utilize, obviously that seem to take care of it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a whole lot better than to be on beta blockers, or which is also another kind of intuitive, is to put somebody that is dehydrated, put them on a diuretic, and think that would be better. Right?
Yes, we see things differently.
Yeah, exactly. So, what have you seen? You mentioned a bunch of different disease pictures that's come into your practice, and with TBM and these lifestyle changes, and also some nutritional supplementation, you've seen some pretty miraculous changes in people's lives. You mentioned fibromyalgia, lupus, and what are some other things that you feel that TBM really shines in these areas?
A couple I'll touch on. One is allergies. Our experience is that allergies are nothing more than faulty programming. and we can pinpoint the specific program that's behind a specific allergy and neutralize it, from iodine reactions to peanuts to poison ivy. In fact, my first encounter with Viktor Frank, the founder of TBM, was with poison ivy. I had an anaphylactic reaction with poison ivy, and was told if I got exposed to it again, I probably wouldn't survive. And so when I went and worked in his office, I was a student at the time, and he said, "Is there anything you're allergic to?" I said, "I'll show you. We can use TBM and we can correct it." And I said, "Well, poison ivy." So we use these test vials. Viktor Frank actually invented using test vials and combined with muscle testing to evaluate different functions of the body. And so he did his work with this test vial. Just took a couple of minutes, and he said, "You'll be fine." And I probably I got into whitewater kayaking, and I can't tell you how many times I traipsed through a whole bunch of poison ivy, never had a reaction. Another area where TBM, I think, really shines is in emotional well-being. I worked with a lot of very depressed patients. A lot of my patients are actually outright suicidal. And again, so many of the emotional distresses that people are experiencing, and it's not because they're broken or something's wrong with them as a person. Again, there is programming within the brain to run the brain as its own or as an organ itself. Obviously, the neurologic system drives other parts of the body, but sometimes we forget that the neurologic system is an organ unto itself, and it has programming. I loved working with that. I had my own health journey, so to speak, included a lot of depression, included suicidal ideation, and things like that. And so I had to dig my way out of that, and so I probably got more personal satisfaction in helping people that way than even some of the other issues that you've mentioned.
Yeah, I can really see that. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm here with Dr. Kevin Millet. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt. I'm here with Dr. Kevin Millet. He's the owner of Total Body Modification, also known as TBM. So, Dr. Millet, you're talking about the areas where TBM really shines, and you're talking about allergies. A lot of us are dealing with gluten sensitivities and dairy sensitivities, corn sensitivities, and all these different sensitivities people are experiencing more and more, and they are getting ADD, ADHD. Gut is painful. Their joints are swollen and inflamed in response to these sensitivities. So in TBM, you can then actually reprogram the individual so that they are not sensitive to these things again.
That has been consistent with my experience time and time again. Yes.
So when these people, instead of then being on like you're saying, anti-inflammatories or pain medication or acid blockers or blood pressure medication, or the list goes on and on and on, if you just would go and then correct the internal programming, the signals are being sent in response to different substances. And then obviously you need to pair that with healthy lifestyle and sleep and drinking 500 gallons of water. You can then you can come back to normal, and you don't have to really deal with these things again, and you can function in a normal fashion.
Yeah, it's a lasting renewal process. Absolutely. And I just want to mention that I always go to great lengths to educate our providers that you have to be really smart with medications. And sometimes patients get gung-ho about some improvements they're seeing and can get overzealous in taking themselves off of medications. And my approach is, let's eliminate the need for it. Let's include all the different professionals that we need to, pharmacists, whoever prescribed it. And once we have a confidence that the need for the medication is no longer there, let's go off it in a way that doesn't create new problems. I'm sure you've had the experience of people that have withdrawn from certain medications a little too quickly and can create problems in and of themselves that wouldn't have happened if it just would have been done a little bit more cautiously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people, a lot of times when they come to a more of an integrative health practitioner, they go there because they're so tired of the buckets of medication that they have to take, and they can't wait for the day when they don't have to take them because they can feel the effect of those medications. So it's you really have to reel them in and hold them back because they tend to get very overzealous and cutting out things that the body quite isn't ready to stop just because it's used to that medication being there and compensating for it being there. So yeah, I agree.
Exactly. And I'm as zealous as the other person, to be as drug-free as possible. I'm 53 and haven't taken any medications whatsoever since I was a teenager. That being said, I also have a very deep appreciation for it. I had a daughter that at age 3, she got exposed to some pesticides, and it just shut down bone marrow production, which was diagnosed as leukemia. We needed to lean on some of those drugs for a few months to buy us time to renew our body. And so there's certainly, a place for it, but, there's nothing quite like a properly functioning body to support life and health. Drugs are never going to hold a candle, and that's the great news is we actually can bring the body back. A lot of physicians have the assumption that the body will never be any better than it is now. And so therefore we have to compensate for it with all these drugs or limit your life. You can't play basketball anymore or whatnot. But the good news is actually the body is always ready to be renewed. If it's just supported in the right way, if it gets the right type of activation, whether it's TBM or other things that are available, if we want it, it's always within reach for us.
And I think that's an important point because people think that it's an either-or thing, that either you have to do these natural therapies or you need to do medical intervention. And it is, the medical interventions, they do have a place. So it is important to utilize them prudently, but you can't repair a body, you can't build up tissue, it's through antibiotics or antidepressants or beta blockers or painkillers. None of that is going to restore normal physiological function, nor is it ever going to be a building block, that you can build a kidney with or a liver with or, a joint with at any time. So, but it's important to understand that they still play a role, even though it is not something that was meant to be done forever. And that's where, things like TBM really shines, where it can then restore normal physiological function, where you then have, even in a time of crisis, where you are maybe using some medical intervention at the same time.
Well, and I would like to think that we are restoring dignity back to humanity.
Yeah.
I think, relying on a lot of drugs or, having a body that's more and more restricted, not be able to get around except through, a motorized scooter or something like that. Each and every life is a gift and it's precious, and each and every one of us have a precious gift to give. And life isn't just about just living and getting through day by day. It's about having the immeasurable satisfaction of knowing that we are being a gift. And And more than anything, that's what I hope TBM brings for people. Yes, I want them out of pain, want them sleeping, want them to take less medications, but I want them to get to witness that they actually can make a contribution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know we're closing here. I want people out there to recognize, one of the points that you're making, that the body can compensate for a long time. So even though an organ is functioning at 50%, you may not still be exhibiting any kind of symptoms or illness picture or disease, and you think you're running around as a healthy individual. But it is better to go and just like you would do with a car, you run through a checkup to see, how's the oil doing, how the tires, and you're kind of checking all the systems. And with TBM, you have the ability to do that as well, where you can kind of check and make sure, am I only running at 50%? What can I do to kind of turn these systems up so that it can run at its optimum? So I would, even though you may not be fighting an illness, I would strongly suggest that you still evaluate the body and do a checkup. And I think that TBM is an excellent technique for that. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Millet, for being on the show today. It's really been a pleasure.
You're welcome. And may I mention our website before we sign off?
Absolutely. Please do.
Great. We have a listing of providers that are around the world, and they can go to TBM, Total Body Modification, TBMseminars.com, and there is a Find a Provider link at the top, and they could use that to find someone nearest them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and also that link will be on our website so that you can find it there as well. That's all for today. I'm Dr. Michael Karfledt with Healthmade Radio. Remember to connect with us at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.